found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Police believe that irrational jealousy drove Andrew Callahan to murder his rival. But sometimes, investigators can find no motive at all. A suburb of Seattle, the Woodbridge section of Bellevue, Washington, is a quiet neighborhood. One that is unfamiliar with brutal crime. On January 5th, 1997, a morning 911 call brought Bellevue police to a secluded park. A passerby discovered the lifeless body of a young woman. A rope fastened tightly around the victim's neck made it clear she had been murdered. Police began searching for any form of identification to tell them who this victim was.
No other visible signs.
Lying near the body, they found a checkbook. The account was in the name of Karen White, and it listed a San Diego address. Bellevue police searched through records looking for a Karen White who matched the victim's description. Homicide detective Jeff Gomes found a potential match. A 20-year-old woman with that name and physical description listed a previous address just a few blocks from the park where the body was found. After confirming it was the same Karen White that had been found murdered, Detective Gomes had the grim task of making the notification.
As a detective, one of the most difficult tasks you have is notifying next of kin of a death in their family. I don't enjoy it. It's very difficult to do.
Several hours after the body was recovered, detectives went to the White home. Though several cars were parked in the driveway, the house was dark. No one appeared to be home.
The Imperial commander should be up ahead.
Give them what for? Kindly remind them they don't belong on Europa.
Detectives discovered an
Let's skip the
unlocked
kindly
door.
part.
Fearing that someone could be in danger, one of the officers entered the property. The house was eerily silent. It appeared the residents had been robbed. After finding no one downstairs, the detective proceeded to the upper floors. As he approached the bedroom, he noticed bloodstains on the outside of the door. When he looked inside, he discovered the lifeless body of a teenage girl. She had been viciously beaten and stabbed to death. He yelled for his partner to call in for backup. Next, he followed a trail of blood that led down the hall into another room. There, he found another grisly scene. A middle-aged couple lay dead. Their skulls had been crushed. They'd been stabbed repeatedly. The victims were later identified as 17-year-old Janet White and her parents, Regina and Walter White. They were the immediate family of the young woman found murdered in the park just hours earlier. Forensic technicians began searching for clues to help them reconstruct what happened. All of the victims had been savagely beaten with a blunt object and then stabbed dozens of times in the face and neck. Police photographed and swabbed dozens of bloodstains. The only real clues to the killer's identity were bloody boot prints found on the carpet. And one on the back of Walter White's shirt. Though the triple murder at the White residence appeared to be the result of a robbery gone bad, that didn't explain the murder of Karen White just a few blocks away.
Just the area around the water tower, the picnic area and stuff. It looked like there's some activity of people being up there, but we don't know if it's related to the crime or not.
In a community that witnessed few homicides, police were convinced that finding an entire family murdered in one day was more than coincidence.
The main question was, are these scenes connected? Was that the same suspect acting in both scenes? Was it a one-time incident where a person killed his family, or was it a serial killer?
Despite the lingering questions, police were faced with the reality that at least one brutal killer was on the loose in the city of Bellevue. And until they could identify a suspect or an apparent motive, police were powerless to stop him from killing again. While searching for answers in the strangulation murder of 20-year-old Karen White, Bellevue, Washington police made a shocking discovery. A few blocks away from where her body was found, detectives discovered that her parents, Regina and Walter White, and her 17-year-old sister Shannon, had been brutally beaten and stabbed to death in their home. Police focused their investigation on Karen's murder, believing that her killer was responsible for the other 3 homicides. Through interviews, investigators learned that before Karen moved to San Diego to become a volunteer in the AmeriCorps program, she associated with a tightly knit group of teenagers who were part of a movement referred to as goth.
Young teenagers, dressing all in black, painting their faces white, dyeing their hair. They sometimes pretend to be vampires with fangs, teeth, and they dress the part. Witches, they pretend to be witches.
Police learned that one of those friends had seen Karen the night before her body was discovered. The friend had stopped by the White residence. Karen had come back to Bellevue for a few days to visit her family. That night, Karen wanted to run out and do some last-minute errands before returning to San Diego the following day. After being dropped off at home a few hours later, Karen said she still had one more errand to run. She wanted to see a teenager named David Anderson, who owed her some money. The friend decided not to go along. Police jumped on the lead. Under questioning, David Anderson, a 17-year-old high school student, confirmed he and Karen White were friends. But he said he hadn't seen her since she had come back into town. On the night of the murder, he stated he was at a friend's house all night. He and his friend never left. When asked if he owned any boots, Anderson said he had one pair and retrieved them for the detective. But it was clear that the sole pattern on his boots did not resemble the bloody prints recovered from the victim's residence. Frustrated, investigators continued interviewing Karen White's friend. One believed she had important information. She said that on the night of the murders, David Anderson had been at her apartment hanging out with her roommate. Around 10 p.m., Anderson and her roommate, 17-year-old Alex Barani, decided to go out. She recalled that Alex had something stuffed inside the sleeve of his overcoat. She thought it was a bat or a club. The woman fell asleep a short while later and was unsure what time the two returned to the apartment. Having caught David Anderson in a lie, police turned to his friend Alex Barani for additional information. Alex was cooperative and even friendly with police. He insisted he and David had been home all night. But when detectives confronted him with his roommate's statements, his demeanor changed. Homicide detective Bob Thompson.
His chin began to quiver. He immediately started sweating, and he became visibly nervous. I, at that time, decided, I think this guy did the murder.
Under persistent questioning, Alex Barani unraveled. The 17-year-old confessed to all 4 murders. He said after leaving the apartment, he dropped David Anderson off at his girlfriend's house and then went to the park alone to meet Karen White. He planned to tell Karen that David would be unable to pay back the money he owed her. On his way there, he decided he wanted to know what it was like to kill. He strangled the young woman. Fearing that Karen had told her parents her plans, Alex went to her home and bludgeoned and stabbed the family to death. Alex Barani said he had thrown away his boots that had left the prints found at the crime scene.
You have the right to remain silent.
He was placed under arrest and charged with the 4 murders. Though Alex had confessed to the murders, investigators knew from experience that they still needed to scientifically corroborate his statements. And they were unconvinced that he had acted alone. All of the crime scene photographs from the White's residence were sent to renowned blood spatter expert Ross Gardner in Georgia. Gardner looked to reconstruct the triple murder one droplet of blood at a time.
Most of your forensic evidence tells you who was involved in the crime. But what happened at the crime, how it happened, is sometimes very significant. And bloodstain patterns speak to those events that created the bloodstains. They tell us what happened and how it happened.
Using bloodstain patterns observed in the photographs, Gardner first looked to establish what types of weapons had been used in the murders. He recognized 2 distinct cast-off patterns. The first type of pattern was consistent with having been caused by sharp force trauma, most likely by the blade of a knife.
The size of the stains are very small. And here in particular, very similar to what we saw on the scene. And the reason being is we have a very thin edge on which the blood can accumulate as it's being cast off.
A larger blunt instrument made the second type of bloodstain pattern that Gardner identified.
If we were to observe a cast-off that is the result of a club or a bloody hand being swung, something like that, we're going to see a significantly different kind of cast-off. We're going to see larger stains, greater volume, and they're going to develop over a little bit wider area.
Next, Gardner set out to understand the sequence of events inside the master bedroom. His first clue came from the tiny bloodstains found on the back of Walter White's t-shirt. Those stains had originated from his wife, Regina. That suggested that she had been the first victim, attacked in the couple's bed while her husband lay sleeping beside her.
The father had his back to his wife, as she was being attacked in the very early stages of blunt force attack, because it was very tiny spatter that impacted on the t-shirt.
To understand what happened next, Gardner entered the coordinates of all of the bloodstains found in the room into a computer database. Then, specially designed forensic software was applied to the data. The location and pattern of the father's blood found next to the bed suggested he was attacked with a knife as he tried to get up. A trail of his blood led from that spot to the foot of the bed, where his body finally came to rest. There, more of the father's blood was found spattered on the walls, indicating he came under attack a second time. Those cast-off patterns had been caused by both a knife and a blunt object.
When we took the combination of all the stains that were found in this corner, it really demanded, there was really no other explanation but that this spatter event was occurring and the sharp force was occurring from the other side.
The stains indicated that the attacker stood in front of the victim's head when beating him with a blunt object, which caused his blood to eject into the scene in a radiating pattern. But Gardner found no blood spatter on the surface of one section of wall. The only explanation for the finding was that there was a second attacker standing in front of that wall. Lastly, the blood evidence showed that 17-year-old Janet rushed to her parents' room, but then was attacked and then dragged back to her room, where she became the final victim. Gardner's analysis was consistent with Alex Barani's confession, with one major exception. He had not acted alone. And investigators believe that Alex was protecting his friend, David Anderson. Police obtained a warrant to search the vehicle David Anderson had driven on the night of the murders. They found a length of rope on the front seat. Forensic examiners concluded that it was the same type of rope used to strangle 20-year-old Karen White. David Anderson was also charged with 4 counts of murder. Police believe that David Anderson and Alex Barani murdered Karen White at the park, motivated by sick curiosity. They next set their sights on the victim's entire family. Based on their complete disregard for human life, Alex Barani and David Anderson were tried as adults. Both received 4 consecutive life sentences. In Washington State, analysis of the crime scene helped expose a second killer's identity. But when police are unable to locate a victim's body, proving murder is much more difficult. In the late afternoon hours of November 10th, 1995, Rhonda Mitchie entered the Phoenix Police Department to report her child missing. She hadn't heard from her 13-year-old son, Brad Hansen, in nearly 12 hours. Though Brad was a responsible and loving son, he seemed to be going through a rebellious phase.
Great work down there, Guardian.
In fact,
Come on back
Brad had
and
been
warm up.
recently grounded.
Hey, do we have
He
cocoa?
was supposed to come
Is that
straight
okay?
home after
I'll
school.
put on some water.
After saying goodbye to him earlier that morning, Rhonda, a single mom, went to work. She later learned that there were no classes that day. She called Brad's pager and contacted several of his friends. But the 13-year-old never called back, and his friends hadn't seen him that day. Detective Sally Dillion agreed to look into the case. She was optimistic that there would be a quick resolution.
We thought he ran away from home, that he was staying with a friend, and, you know, that in a day or two, 3, that he would return home.
But after several days went by without a word, authorities several hundred miles away in California were dispatched to the home of Brad Hansen's father. Investigators hoped they would find the boy there. But Mr. Hansen had not heard from Brad in some time.